Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Welcome back, folks, to this feature edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. I'm going to do a quick intro here because we are kind of short on time, and I want to get to all this. It's my pleasure to welcome back Tom Opre. You've heard him episodes past. He joined us in NASC 3 years ago now in Dewey Beach. He is the founder of Shepherds of Wildlife, executive producer of Fire Steel Films. You'll know him from Killing the Shepherd, The Last Keeper, which with the most recent film, and now we're talking about the Real Yellowstone, which was written and directed by Tom. This will be featured in Memphis this year at the NASC Film Festival that we have. So those that are coming, look forward to this. Great film. I watched it a couple times. It was just so much meat on the bone here. Off air, I was telling Tom, I think I've got this thing into 3 or 4 chapters where we're looking at, more like ranchers versus rewilding, business versus natural space, habitat management, fair chase versus fair market value. This is a huge film with so many policy issues going on. Like I said, try to keep this intro short. Tom is with us. He's on the road. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, no, it's great to be here. Great to be with everybody from Congressional Sportsmen Foundation, and appreciate everything you guys do. So, yeah, that was a great intro. Thanks, Fred. Yeah, where do we start? Yeah, you were asking me before we started. Just kind of what's the purpose behind this film, and it's just like you said. We've done a couple other films. Killing the Shepherd, it came out in 21. The Last Keeper, it came out last year, and it's all about the fact that if we're going to have wildlife resources, if we're going to have vibrant, wildlife populations, if we're going to have healthy forests, if we're going to have clean drinking water, then we better make sure that we take care of those resources. And as a species, we don't have a very good track record of taking care of our natural resources. And let's face it, now with 8.1 billion humans on the planet, I mean, there is serious pressure on our wildlife and wildlife resources and the land and all that all over the world. And so, I live in Montana. And after doing the last couple films about, giving a voice, probably more than anything, just giving a voice to rural people around the world. Because, I mean, even here in Montana, wildlife doesn't live in cities, guys. It doesn't live on mountains here because they're covered with snow and ice most of the year. It lives on fertile ground, and it lives on fertile ground with people. And it's those people that have to see a benefit to having that wildlife resource and having that good land stewardship ethos. And without it, we don't have these things. And we've got thousands of years of human history, where we pretty well muck things up. But hey, late 1800s, the smart people got together. Gifford Pinchot, the father of the Forest Service, coined the term wise use is conservation. And conservation's not a mindset. It's not an emotion. It's a physical act. It's to be a conservationist, you must conserve. And so, at the end of the day, we live in a society, like even here in Montana, where the majority of the people live in cities and towns. They don't live in the rural landscapes. They don't interact with wildlife out in that kind of scenario, where our ranchers and farmers do. I mean, let's face it, the majority of wildlife lives on private land in America, especially out here in the Rocky Mountain West. And a big reason for that is because these ranchers take care of the land. And when they take care of the land, and not saying all of them do it, but the majority do, because it's kind of, self-defeating financially if you don't take care of your land, because you can't raise as much livestock on it. And so we've seen some really fascinating things going on, especially there's a new generation of younger ranchers that are starting to take over the ranches out here. I'm talking fourth, fifth generation, 40 something, pushing 50. They're taking over, and they're starting to implement some pretty innovative ideas when it comes to ranching and farming. But most of it's this kind of regenerative concept, regenerative ranching, which mimics kind of what the landscape had before, colonization by Northern European. We had a fair number of bison on the landscape. You also had your Native American populations that were, in most cases, keeping pretty good check on things. Maybe even keeping a really good check on it, to the point where they'd be pushing those populations down. But at the end of the day, all this grass, all this prairie ground, evolved over a period of time of being pretty hammered by herbivores, big bison herds. And so what these ranchers have figured they can do is, hey, if we kind of mimic what's going on, in the case of what we showed in the film is some families that will put 1,000 head on 100 acres for 24 hours, and that hammers it. And it looks like it's been nuked, but it's like going to the gym, lifting weights, eating good, drinking good, and then giving yourself a week of rest.
Mhm.
And boy, you come back stronger. And that's exactly the key, is the rest. And if you use it hard, and all this landscape's used to being hammered, and because of the bison herds. And so what we've seen is not only the land has a better, just across the board, all the biomarkers and the way that they look at the value, nutritional value of these grasses and these prairie grasslands, they're way better. They have zero soil exposure. You've got a more robust plant life, a better biome, can, holds more carbon, CO2, carbon dioxide. And then at the same time, you actually get a lot more moisture content. And what we see is not only can more cattle can be raised on the land, but the wildlife wins on the coattails of that. So it's really, really fascinating what happens. And of course, there's all kinds of things that come with lots of wildlife on the landscape, which that's another part of the story.
I found myself extremely conflicted at multiple points in the film, um, between the work that I do with CSF and policy, uh, being a conservationist myself, an active participant in that, kind of a libertarian streak that runs through me as far as self-sufficient, not relying on big government, um, but also understanding national security and what that is. Um, from resource exploration, that is there's so many tangents you could go down culturally right now, what's going on in the news, to food security, that is a national security issue with our beef stock. You mentioned in the film, there's a monopoly. Four big conglomerates that do all the beef, manufacturing, if you will, or raising. A lot of this stuff gets exported. We don't even see any of it, and then there's this weird 80-20-90-10 split that we bring stuff in. We're already doing it on the ground, but we tend to bring it in. Just, recently here, we signed a deal with Argentina to bring Argentinian beef in, so it's like, if there's a lot going on, and, you wanna be able to have these vast spaces that have access for hunters, anglers, trappers, the people that are doing the conservation, that are putting, their boots on the ground and funding the whole thing, but then you don't wanna stop us from being secured. And I'm really, like, I got so much going on in my head. I guess what I'm trying to say is, we gotta strike a balance. There has to be a balance, and where does that lie? And maybe that's just the question we don't answer. I don't wanna give the whole movie away because I want people to watch, but at the end, there's a gentleman, Eric Wilkins, that you highlight, who seems to be one of these younger guys you reference, that has struck a balance of being a businessman, being a local rancher, um, supplying a kind of a local economy, not so much a big four monopoly, but also appreciating conservation, balance on the landscape, the North American model of wildlife conservation, and the role that hunters, trappers, and anglers have in that being a preferred method of management. I'm sure there's a question in there. Go ahead and take it from there as well. I just threw a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting, when we were looking at the one of the things I think you might be hinting on is like American Prairie. So a lot of people are, it's a huge hot button issue, especially in central Montana. Basically, 25 years ago, a guy named Sean Garrity had this idea. He had, well, what it was the Nature Conservancy did these studies trying to determine where there was still the last vestiges of kind of unplowed ground, prairie ecosystem, whatnot. This is kind of coming out of that Y2K thing as far as, Yellowstone to the Yukon and all that. And so they did these studies. I would say it was like their first one was in the 80s, and then they did one in 99. And then they talked about some of this. And then this organization called American Prairie Reserve was created about 25 years ago. And it was spearheaded by, and the first CEO was a guy named Sean Garrity. And basically, he talked guys like Forrest Mars, who's Mars Candy Company, billionaire, bunch of people like that. Not a lot of them, but enough of them to raise tens of millions of dollars a year to buy up land that they could basically revert back to, if it had been plowed, they want to revert it back to prairie. Most of the land that they're buying, though, came with government allotments that are tied to the Bureau of Land Management. So this is an area kind of like south of Malta, Montana, so north central Montana on the High Line, right below the Canadian border, all the way down the Missouri River, where you've got the Charlie Russell National Wildlife Refuge. And so the idea was that they have all this land up there, about 3 million acres, including the refuge, and they want to try to pull it all together into one contiguous, homogeneous landmass that they can have free-ranging bison like before Lewis and Clark, like 30,000 bison was the original concept behind it. And then we're going to have grizzly bears and wolves manage it. That was the plan. And so if you really start to look at it, so the reason why this land exists the way it is was you go back to homesteading days. And of course, in order to keep land, you had to show that you could create a usage out of it that was beneficial for you. And if you could, then the government would give you the land. Unfortunately, a lot of this land was not very fertile, but the only fertile land was kind of the strips of land that was basically the lowland where the creeks are and stuff. But when you get up in the upper prairie sagebrush, it wasn't functioning well enough so that they could make a go of it. So that land reverted back to the federal government, and today the BLM manages it. And but part of the Taylor Grazing Act was to allow allotments of this public land to kind of be attached to this deeded land. So you can have a ranch that's 2, 3, 5,000 acres, but it might have 5, 10, 20, 30,000 acres of government land. So you're talking about like our government. I mean, when it comes to countries that are self-sufficient with food, not many countries in the world are, and the United States is one of them. And so you were talking about national, the security issues and things like that. And so at the end of the day, when you start taking lands out of production, in this case cattle production, it can have real impacts on the security of our country. And so in the case of American Prairie, their concept is it started, like I said, 25 years ago. They wanted to create this huge 3 million acre reserve and have bison roaming around at about 30,000 with wolves and grizzly bears managing it.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that works in a vacuum, maybe in the land of rainbows, but it doesn't really work in the real world. And in fact, I did an interview with a guy named Mark Hostler, who was Ted Turner's bison manager, worked for Turner for 33 years. And he said, we talked to these people and we said, hey, this isn't going to work. You can't just buy a bunch of land and throw bison on it and go, voila, let nature be free. It's all going to be wonderful, because that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You end up having some real issues that come with that. And the reason why he told them that was because they tried that. And Ted tried to do the whole deal, Ted Turner, and it didn't work. So they had to come up with a very specific management plan when it came to these bison. But the way this whole is coming together is that there is land that during homesteading days reverted back to the federal government. So that's this land that the Bureau of Land Management manages. And it's land that wasn't fertile enough for homesteaders to make a go on it. But what you have these strips of lowland, creek bottom stuff that actually people could make a go, and they were able to deed that land. And so now you have a bunch of ranches that are 2, 3, 5, 8,000 acres, which, in Montana is not real big, but they come attached to government grazing allotments on that BLM. So if you have a 2 or 3 or 5,000 acre ranch, it may have a grazing allotment that is attached to the deeded land. Now, it's not owned by the deeded landowner, but they have a grazing right for a certain amount of time coming back. This all originated from the Taylor Grazing Act. And so at the end of the day, you might have 5, 10, even 20 or 30,000 acres that are allotted to that deeded property. And so what American Prairie found out is that, hey, we could buy up this deeded land, and then it comes with these grazing allotments. And of course, you have to graze them, otherwise you lose them at the end of the day. And so, at the end, their goal was to have all these bison there. Now, let's fast forward to today, 2025. You have they have to have them being grazed. Now they only have about 900 bison on 2 different ranches. One is cross fence, so they can move the bison around. The other one's just got one contiguous fence all around it. They pulled out all the interior fences, and those bison can go ramrod around on about 30,000 acres. Not much of an impact, but But the idea is to revert, any area that's been farmed, it's been under plow. They want to revert it back to prairie ground. It's a noble idea and stuff, but kind of getting back to that whole, the security, the food security of your country. If you take out, you know, 2 or 3 million acres out of production, it could have an impact if there is an issue down the road. So basically, that's what their plan is. And if you think about it, 3 million acres is actually larger than Yellowstone National Park and Glacier National Park
Mm,
combined.
that's crazy. Here again is like one of the conflicts, right? Like, and one of your guests, one of the folks, the personalities you interviewed, spoke to this. Talking about American Prairie. That on the face of it, it sounds real good. And as a sportsman, I like the idea of having kind of that exclusivity place somewhere to go that's kind of unencumbered, which becomes a problem later in the film that we can get to maybe today, but maybe definitely on the second part. So like here are these competing ideas within one person. Me watching this is like, I understand that we need wild places to be conserved, not preserve, because that says we can't touch it or play on it, right? So we get taken out of that. So it needs to be conserved. We got to have these places to go, but then also, you're putting all these people out of business, and where does that go? And then the rewilding thing, you and I talked about this with The Last Keeper, this idea of, again, sounds nice, but like you alluded to, like Land of Rainbows and Unicorns, we are so far down the evolutionary rabbit hole of people, the Western expansion, Europeans coming over. We are where we are in 2025, and there's no going back. You're not going to reestablish something that was 250 years ago, that was 400 years ago, because as you well know, everything's fragmented up, everything's parceled up. There's fence rows on the landscape. Like, no matter how much you want to wish into existence, it's never going to be the same as it was. You would have to depreciate the population by like what, 7 billion people, which is, we're not going to do a Thanos snap here. And that gets into a whole nother crazy conversation not suited for this program. But like, you're just not going to get there. It's not achievable. And you bring the predators in and you highlight that the nature's going to find its way. No, they start going for the easy pickings, and then they start running into cattle and human beings. And that's also highlighted in the film.
Yeah, predation's real. I mean, it's we're in the middle of a 36 city tour of the film, both here in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and we even screened it in Scotland last month, actually in September. And you're exactly right. I mean, you have the situation where the question I have is, okay, so you want to rewild, you want it to go back to nature. Well, the actual definition of nature means sans human, no people.
Right.
Okay. I don't know when there was a time with the animals we have running around today and the plant life we have today where there weren't humans somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
And if you look at North America here, Native Americans, for as long as they've been here, have been managing the land. I don't care if we're in Africa, we're in Scotland, or anywhere else. We have been terraforming as the species, the planet for our species existence.
Mm-hmm.
And all the grain that I'm looking at out here in Montana right now does not get eaten by Montanans. I mean, one of the ranchers, Eric Albus, who ran for office in the Montana State Legislature in the film, he grows, wheat, and it's shipped over to Japan for high-end bread products.
Mm.
I mean, the beef, that some people have to ship their beef on, it has to go all the way to Iowa. And, and so, but, like at the end of the day, though, are we going to go ahead and plow down whose house, whose city, whose airport, whose railroad, whose highway?
Yeah.
If you want it all to go back to nature, because the thing is nature's never been free, not as long as we've been on the planet, and it never will be.
That's right.
So all you end up doing is substituting one group of people's human value judgment for another. And so you got this preservation versus conservation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, American Prairie, they have a chairman of the board, a guy named Bill Hill. He spent 7 years running Vulcan for Paul Allen. I'm talking Microsoft Paul Allen, dealing with billions of dollars of philanthropic issue stuff, a lot of money. And it turns out this guy, he believes in sustainable use and conservation and hunting being a major component of conservation here and all over the world. He's an interesting cat. Now, will American Prairie continue to have land open to To the public, well, hey, it's a not 501c3 nonprofit. It has a board. The board dictates policy. At the end of the day, you can say the policy is this, but what happens 20 years from now? What happens 100 years from now? And you've got a bunch of people that are donors that don't like people hunting. They could certainly stop it from happening. So it brings up a lot of questions. Yeah, it's a cool idea. I mean, the first thing he told me was like, how would you like it if we had 4 times the amount of elk? What if you didn't have to wait 25 years to draw a Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep tag? Because there's bighorn sheep on the Missouri River boundary there.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, that all sounds great, but they're not willing to sign anything in perpetuity. They're not willing to put a conservation easement on it because they say it devalues the land. Well, if you're trying to turn it into a wildlife refuge, who cares if you devalue it?
Mm-hmm.
You want it for the wildlife, right? So yeah, so there's some holes out there. And, a lot of people are asking, just in the case of American Prairie, what happens when American Prairie runs out of money?
Mm-hmm.
Is the federal government going to have to manage this now? And is no tax dollars going to have to manage it? I mean, these are all questions. And again, Fred, I don't have answers. I mean, the key to these films and the incredible importance to them is that they're very balanced and very neutral. So we give not only one side or the other, we may give 4 different viewpoints on a subject with different people. And so at the end of the day, I'm trying to search for truth. I'm not interested in creating propaganda, because when you start creating propaganda and you start putting your personal viewpoints into this stuff, you lose the middle ground and you lose that 60-70% of America that we know today say is okay with hunting as long as it's done for consumption. And those are the people that we have to get on to the side, because let's face it, at the end of the day, only 4% of the U.S. population buys a hunting license in any given year. Let's just say it's 10% for argument's sake. And we're seeing the politicization of hunting and conservation every cycle. You've got an anti-hunting, anti-use, anti-ranching, entities out there, nonprofits, that based on their 990s collect about $1 billion a year. And what does it pay for? Not conservation. There's no boots on the ground taking care of the land. There's a whole bunch of Armani wearing suits with $500 haircut attorneys fighting against conservation and fighting against our way of life that, humans have been hunting since the beginning of time.
Yeah, seems like one of the most natural things. 2 points I want to go to. One, kind of go back a little bit with the rewilding. I just wanted to point out what I saw was a contradiction. This point of putting on the bison, and this stood out to me. They were putting the bison through a medical, what the hell am I trying to say here? Like a factory line. And that didn't seem natural to me, because now they're inoculating all these bison to go out and be, air finger quote, natural in their efforts, so that they don't interfere with the cows and the other ungulates that are there naturally with their, bringing in of disease. So I'm like, just watching that on the face, I'm like, well, that's not very natural. And if you're having to put all this effort forth for your, again, air finger quote, rewilding, like, are you really doing what you're saying? Or are you just, you're just polishing it to feel good? Like, it just stood out as a complete contradiction in my mind.
Yeah, well, you got to remember, bison in Montana are not wildlife.
Right.
They're livestock. So, and part of the issue is ranchers are worried about losing our brucellosis-free designation. Now, there has not been any known cases of transfer between bison and cattle. All the known cases of transfer of brucellosis coming from wildlife have come from elk. Elk carry brucellosis. It's pretty prevalent, especially the Yellowstone herd. That's why that when they have bison come out of Yellowstone and in the Paradise Valley, they capture them, they put them, and hold them for a period of time to make sure and test them to make sure they don't have brucellosis before they either slaughter them or ship them off to some of the Indian tribes. But I totally. I mean, again, the other thing too is, in order to keep those grazing allotments, American Prairie has to graze. Right. Well, they don't have any bison on a lot of that ground, so they've released the land or leased it back to a lot of the landowners that they bought from. And there's about between 9,000 and 10,000 cattle on those grazing allotments throughout the year right now. So, there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of serious opinions on it. And of course, the ranchers. No, I mean, let's face it, nobody likes to see change. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Because when American Prairie buys a ranch, they're not putting a ranching family in there.
Right.
There aren't kids going to school. They're not going to the grocery store. They're not going to local bars or the gas stations. They're going to obviously not buying farming implements or equipment. So there's a loss in the community, both economically and the people wise. So now, does American Prairie have employees? Yeah, they've got 50 some employees in Montana. Some of them are multi-generational folks that have lived in Montana for a long time. Some are even tied to the farming and ranching community. But at the end of the day, almost all the money comes from a handful of very, very wealthy individuals and families. It's not like they're getting 25 or $50 from 50 million people every year.
Hmm. The second point I want to get back to, Tom, too, and kind of transition to this a little bit. And again, we're not going to cover all this on this program, unfortunately, but we are going to have a part two for the listening audience. So the film goes into the predator management. It's a hot button issue, especially the lower 48 grizz. It's been the bane of argument, conservation, true management, and then the courts getting involved and all the emotion. This is a real problem for those ranchers. You had Trini Jones, and by the way, I appreciate her wearing her NASC jacket. Looked good on her in the film, so thank you, Trini. But she was talking about how these grizzly bears have been habituated. And again, this isn't like a maligning of the species. She doesn't hate them, but what she does hate is these habituated bears, these generation of bears that are coming in and killing her stock, as well as making it a safety security issue for her own family in a place that her family's been for a long time. And then you go back, then you transition to this gentleman that's a biologist who was on that grizzly bear project. I think he said it was for 30 years, right? So what I'm building to here is a very interesting and albeit anecdotal observation on my end. I have seen this phenomena in biologists where they start off again as conservation, understanding um, bringing a certain species back up to par on the landscape, but then they get to this point where they don't wanna see it be conserved, they wanna preserve it, and they almost take on this parent-like attitude of, "Well, I raised these things from 30 or 40 years ago. I don't want people killing them off. It took so long," which I appreciate the love and passion for it. And I've seen this in wild turkeys. That's my other part of my anecdote. I've seen biologists get to the point where they don't want people killing turkeys, but they were a part of this for 4 decades, and it makes me scratch my head. So like, what do we do all this for? And they lose sight of our role in that from the American model.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I know what Trina Joe Bradley's talking about are just bears that, grizzly bears in the lower 48 are the king of the jungle, folks. I have been in pretty bad, situations
Hmm.
being charged. I had not ever been attacked or anything, but boy, you want to talk about the most primal thing you can experience in life is having something that weighs 5, 6, 800 pounds with big teeth and big claws chomping and coming towards you. It's not a fun situation. But it is in a relationship to these ranchers, though, especially the Rocky Mountain front. You got to remember, everything in nature is programmed to overpopulate the carrying capacity of the land. So these bears got pushed back by colonialism and the ranching and the people and all, and roads and railroads and all that stuff into the wilderness, where if there wasn't anybody bothering them. Now their populations grow and now they're moving out. And of course, bears are omnivores, right? So they don't have to be killing game all the time. They can eat grass, they can eat crops, they love crops. And they're moving out down our river bottoms and moving to places where we haven't seen them in 100 years, maybe more, maybe 150 years. And people are having to live with them. Like Trina Joe talks about her 14-year-old daughter when we were filming 2 years ago had never been allowed to play outside.
Hmm.
Can you imagine your kids never being allowed to go outside in your backyard?
It's wild.
I mean, it's real.
Yeah.
And because they have so many grizzly bears in their backyard. Now, do the grizzly bears, were they there first? Well, yeah, they were there and then they got moved out. Now they're back again. And the thing is that since we don't have any management of bears, and I mean conservation of them, utilize them, hunting them, whatnot, these bears consider themselves to be the king of the jungle. They have no fear of man. Now you go up to Alaska and it's exactly the same DNA. It's a grizzly bear, the brown bear, they're exactly the same thing. You might have 400 or 500 pound bear. You might have a 1,500 pound bear, 12 to 1,500 pound bear. And those bears, if they smell a human being because they're managed and there's hunting season and whatnot, those bears exit stage right. They get the
Yeah.
heck out of Dodge. Last night we were in a screening in eastern Montana, and I was on an Indian reservation, and one of the gals up front was an elder lady. I mean, as an elder Native American, not just old. And she was very complimentary of the film. She really liked it, but she had a young white guy sitting next to her. And I say white guy, I want to make sure people understand that. And he was a National Geographic photographer. And he's like, well, what Trina Joe Bradley says isn't right. That bears don't do that. I looked at him. I said, what do you mean? Bears don't teach their young how to kill? Do you teach your kid how to eat?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. I mean, you get people that have this mindset that everything should be like it is in Yellowstone. Well, that's not how it works, because nobody's sitting there watching the animals kill each other. I mean, the thing is, nature is not pretty. I've got this great friend who's he's a subsistence trapper in the interior of Alaska, Nate Turner. And we went out filming with him one day doing a project on grizzly bears, believe it or not. And he's like, Tom, death is all around me. I don't have anything to do with it. It's just that animals get old, slow and old, and they get ate.
Yep.
That's how nature works. And so we just have to embrace the fact that all this stuff is what it is and why it is. And, what do we have control over? Well, through modern conservation, we can enhance, the land, what we have left of wildlife habitat, we need to take care of it. A lot of these ranchers that are featured in my film also farm. And so, they're leaving out an extra, rows of grain, cereal crops, or they're planting crops specifically for the upland birds and the deer and, the antelope and all that stuff so that they can survive through the winter because there's a value they receive. Most of them are involved in outfitting or some sort of hunting economic model. And I mean, it works. And because they do that, there's a heck of a lot of wildlife. And again, we said in the beginning, wildlife doesn't always live on public land. The majority of it lives on private land because that's the most well taken care of land that provides the most food and cover for wildlife.
The film goes into and touches on fire forest management, hunter access versus the ranchers. You start talking about the outfitting and the exclusivity of that. And again, we're gonna have to wrap up here because we both got places to be. Um, but I wanted to tease this out for the next one. We're talking about shed hunting issues that come into play here, and down to property taxes and these agreements, and I have some notes on that about hey, even down to my own property taxes and correlations there. But there again, there what I'm leading here is there's so much meat and there's so much more to this film that I want to cover with you in part two of this, and that we will cover, and that again, folks coming to Nask in Memphis in December are going to have an opportunity to see this movie, probably talk with Tom for a bit, and definitely record a part two of this. And a lot of this, I think some of the greater controversial things. The whole thing's controversial, but things I want to get to, especially the fair chase stuff. These the ranchers and the outfitters and some of the stuff. Again, I don't want to give it away, but there's some stuff that goes on out there that I had no idea, shaking my head, and I certainly want to go down those rabbit holes with you.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just so people know, this film, we've been screening it all over the Western United States. We are going to have some screenings in the Eastern United States. We're hoping to have a screening in the U.S. Capitol in mid-January. Working
Awesome.
on that right now. And then ultimately, the feature film will end up on my other two films are on Amazon. This will either up on Amazon or Netflix. We've got a producer, major Hollywood producer, pitching it to Netflix right now. We do a 55-minute version for PBS. Wyoming PBS is our presenting station. So in March during pledge break time, it's going to start there, and then it would go into American Public Television syndication catalog. It'll be available to over 300 PBS stations. And then we'll have our educational version, which is what we're going to play at NASC. It's also what we'll play at the U.S. Capitol. It's about 30 minutes long, specifically set up for the corporate boardroom classroom settings, and then, of course, the political trainings. Because, like you said, all this stuff involves policy, and our policy, our leaders of our country need to understand what the realities are on the ground, not the propaganda,
Right.
but what the realities are on the ground, so that they can make good decisions. So that at the end of the day, we leave the planet better than we found it. Who doesn't want our children's great grandchildren to be able to see the wildlife that we have today and see the wild places we have and hopefully see more of it because we've gotten smarter about this and we get more people behind this because Fred, I truly believe that sportsmen and women who do hunt and fish and do all the things that we do to recreate the outdoors, if we do it for the right reasons, we can be the great saviors and stewards of these wild places and this wildlife that lives in them. And all this can exist in perpetuity. As long as humans are on the planet, all of this should exist in
Mhm.
healthy ways because it's all about us. At the end of the day, I said, it's not only about making sure we've got wildlife and healthy forests and all that stuff. It's also about having clean drinking water. And I think we all need that, to survive. So, I look forward to meeting up with you in Memphis. We'll have to schedule probably more than 30 or 40
For
minutes.
sure,
And
100%.
we'll dive deep into it. So, and I am doing a panel discussion on grizzly bears too during the conference.
Fantastic. Tom, where can people find you? Website, social, all of it.
Yeah, so shepherdsofwildlife.org is our website. You can always sign up for our newsletter and get updates. About every 2 weeks, we put out a newsletter, email newsletter. Obviously, Tom Opre, OPRE. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Also, Shepherds can be found on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or I guess it's X now. Anyway, that's all the social media stuff. So follow us on there, and look forward to being in Memphis.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time. Sorry for the technical snafu there. We got it back, but yeah, for sure. Looking forward to connecting and hanging out and having some good conversation. Always enjoy it, Tom. I appreciate your time and safe travels out there.
All right, thanks, Fred.
All right,
Appreciate it.
you
Thanks
bet.
everybody for listening.
Talk soon.
All right, cheers.
Bye bye. All right, my thanks to Tom for coming on from the side of the road in his truck. And well, look again. As acknowledged there at the end, an abbreviated session. Wish we had more time and more time to come into part two as we will broadcast from NASC in Memphis and really get to the rest of my many pages of notes. But look, it's a critical thinking exercise. That's what Tom does with his movies. He gets you thinking and does a good job, I think, of covering all sides of a topic of a issue and I don't think he really, biases one way or another. I think he does a fair job of representing both sides. You hear both their arguments, and it's up to the viewer to come down on it where you're at. This one, um, this one out of the three films I mentioned, including this one, was for me. It was the hardest one to decipher how I feel about it, and I think you heard that. And I acknowledge some of that there in the conversation. One part of me feels this way, the other part feels this way. I'm sympathetic to the ranchers. I'm sympathetic to folks wanting to make sure we have large tracts of land that can't be developed, but it affects so many people in different ways. And maybe there isn't a clear cut answer. The stuff is so incredibly deep. Yeah, there isn't just a one size fits all for everything. So at any rate, you heard Tom in the beginning doing a tour. If you're able to go screen the movie where he's coming, you should go check it out. Have a nice movie theater experience. It's well worth the time to see the full show, full feature, and then hopefully, like you said, come into some streaming services, and you can check those out there. And then certainly at NASC, we're gonna screen a portion of it. I don't think it's the whole 90 minutes, but you'll get a fair flavor of what's going on. Again, complicated issue going back years, and again, lots to think about there, and lots of implications for our community and those that help maintain it, those that allow access. So um, there it is, and we thank Tom again for his time. That'll do it for this week's feature. Again, every other week, so not no feature next week. And again, happy Thanksgiving. We're not Thanksgiving yet. We're getting close. Happy Veterans Day. Um, if you didn't listen to the roundup, put that thanks out there. I'm doing it here again to my fellow veterans. those I served with, those that came before me, those are doing it now. We thank you, and it was an honor to serve with so many great people during my time. That was so very many years ago now. At this point, I can't believe I get to say that because I certainly feel like that was just yesterday, truly. But I digress. So happy Veterans Day! Thank you for all that you do to keep us safe. That'll do it. That's it for the this week's feature. Um, Home stretch of the year, 3 more shows, and then we turn the calendar to 2026. Holy smokes. Some fun ones upcoming. We got some holiday edition shows. You can look forward to that. And then a retrospective look back at the year that was 2025 and where we were, the wins, the head scratchers, all of it. And then I'll look into 2026 and see what the magic 8 ball has for us. Until next week's roundup, if you're tuning in, we thank you. And yeah, be safe out there in the wilds wherever you're at. Hope you're having good hunts, and we'll do it all again. As always, CSF is your inside connection to outdoor legislation. We will see you next time. So long. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.